Hi, I'm John Stine, Executive Director of the Open Voice Network. We make voice worthy of user trust, and this is the Future of Voice podcast. Thanks. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'd love to welcome and delighted to welcome Hans van Dam, the CEO of the Conversation Design Institute, to the latest episode of this podcast. As many of you know, Hans, the CEO of the Conversation Design Institute, co-founder of the Conversational Academy. It's the world's leading training and certification institute for conversation designers. They've been working with brands like Walmart, JP Morgan, Google, ABN AMRO, and many others to make AI assistants, to make voice assistants more human-centric, helpful, and natural. Hans lectures at multiple universities around and speaks often at conferences around the world. It's been our pleasure to partner and work with Hans. So Hans, thanks for the time. Welcome, and glad you could join us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, John. It's a great pleasure,
It's a pleasure.
always.
It's a pleasure. Let's start. Let's start with just the origin story. Hans van Dam, growing up in the Netherlands. How does Hans van Dam get to conversation design? What's the path? What's the journey?
Yeah, okay. Let's not do the whole origin story, but no, I think what I've been doing, it's always been all over the place. But actually, there is an origin story now. So in university, I always wanted to be a writer, and I was interested in literature and philosophy, in history, and I was just writing stories and thought I would win big literature prizes, that everybody would love it, but turned out not to be the case. So whatever I wrote, publishers didn't care for, and then I discovered that you can become a copywriter, and so that was kind of cool. So I started doing that, and one of my first gigs was actually at a startup incubator in Amsterdam. So MIT Stanford Venture Lab, they had like a thing that they ran in Amsterdam, and that's where I worked. And it was really cool. I learned a lot about technology. I learned a lot about startups, um, and I learned how to write better. And I joined a video streaming startup, and that didn't really turn out the way that we had hoped. So when that project failed, I needed to get a job, and I ended up working in customer service. And we did that for KLM, Dutch airline, on social media, so on Twitter, like stranded travelers. I would go into the systems and find their luggage and talk to them and do all of those things. And then I wasn't there for too long, but they were talking about chatbots and automating all of that stuff. And so I joined a chatbot technology company, and it was interesting because I saw it was like the rise of the conversational interface, and I saw how everybody was struggling with writing good conversations for that. It's like the experience was really bad. And for me, it was like, oh, well, I know how to write dialogue from when I wanted to write fiction. I understand the technology from my time at that incubator, and how all those things work. And I understand the customer service space pretty well because I've also been working in that now. So yeah, it's like, there's something here that I should explore. And I started, doing that solo, got a few clients. Then my co-founder, and he had a behavior design agency. So they're psychologists that think about user experience and, how do we design for specific behavior online. And for us, it kind of made sense to team up because, if you have an artificial brain talk to human brain, then you need to understand psychology and you need to understand the technology, and they're equally important. So that was kind of the thesis that we started with. And as we started out as an agency, and then we developed curriculum that was very focused on behavior design for conversational interfaces. And Google had just launched the Google Assistant, so they were interested in skilling people up for conversation design. And they were impressed with the stuff that we've been doing, the stuff that we developed around, the very advanced copywriting techniques that we can apply. But they were like, yeah, you guys lack all the basics. So they kind of took us under their wings, and Wally Brill was one of the people that we worked
Sure.
with a lot, and I owe him a lot. And he's kind of my mentor in that period, and he connected me to all these different people that have been doing this for 20 years. And they all said the same thing. You're like, this is so different. You cannot teach anyone how to do conversation design. But we saw the patterns of what everybody was doing that was very experienced, and we've been able to capture that into a workflow, a step-by-step process that we can teach people and certify people on. And that is really how we got our start, from the experience through agencies, then getting skilled up ourselves, and then turning that into a workflow that is now something that people use around the world.
Hans, I think that's fascinating, and as a former copywriter myself, the your approach and your appreciation of the power of language, of and again the combination of words and how words affect us, how words nudge us, how words move us, how phrases and the like, shape behavior and push us. That's a fascinating intersection, of behavioral understanding and just the ability to frame words and put it together. Tell us more about, that intersection and how that's so
Yeah.
important in what you do.
Yes, I mean, a lot of people are also familiar with Kahneman's system 1 and 2, where people think we're very rational beings, but actually, a lot of our behavior is driven by a few things. And if you understand those things, you can manipulate is the wrong word, but you can use it to make the outcomes better. And, so if
And
let's say
forgive
I
me
have
for
a
interrupting.
conversation.
You're referring to Daniel Kahneman's work and you
Yeah,
know
yeah,
yeah,
thinking fast
yeah,
and slow. Yeah,
yes,
uh,
exactly, yeah.
which is a great book, and everybody should read it. And but also Robert Cialdini, who wrote the book Influence. There's a lot of stuff that's known about how do you design for behavior, and what we've been doing is actually taking those principles and applying them to a conversational interface. Now, one of the things that you see companies make mistakes in, or what they get wrong, is that let's say we're talking chatbots, like it's there are more chatbots than those are the biggest operations. But let's say I, as an AI assistant, I say I'm the AI assistant, ask me a question. Then it's people will ask anything, particularly if I say I'm the smart AI assistant. How can I help you? Then all right, these people are thinking, oh, this assistant is smart. Let's see what you can do. Whereas if I understand framing better, a psychological principle from behavior design, I might say, ask me questions about coffee and tea. Then the other person's probably gonna ask me questions about coffee and tea. So by using language to frame certain things, I'm influencing the behavior of my users, and I can do that throughout. So there are different things that I can do to increase motivation, to increase ability, certain prompts that I can design to just make it easier. If I want someone to buy something, how do I increase the motivation? Well, scarcity. We only have a few left. Or most people like this, where I use social proof. Or anticipatory enthusiasm. When you buy an airline ticket, they always show you a picture of the destination. Well, that's so that you already picture yourself there. You can use all of these techniques in conversational interfaces, and a lot of people are not aware of that. And once you sort of find that, it's a very beautiful dance that you can play with all those people that are talking to your assistants.
And Hans, this framing concept, I think, is so important for those of us in the conversational world. And with all the conversation, the talk lately about ChatGPT, a marvelous, incredible leaps ahead, etc. But chatting with another colleague here this past week, who said, conversational AI is cursed by the fact that when we engage with an assistant, we begin to assume it is human. There's a human type interaction going back and forth. And so our expectations rise. And and again, if we think, oh, this is the world's smartest conversational AI, we will think we can ask it, as you said, we can ask it anything.
Yeah,
But to be able to frame it, because the purpose of the assistant on behalf of the company that's employing it is to bring delight and satisfaction, to answer, to create value for that user, right? So it's, the framing and being able to, in a sense, manage the expectations seems to be one of the many critical things that you teach, but really, really important to just the sense of satisfaction that a user would
yeah,
have with a conversational assistant.
yeah. And there's a lot to unpack there, what you're saying, but few things that I think it's a very big misunderstanding, that enterprises think, or a lot of people in conversational AI think, that the goal is to imitate natural conversation, which I think is very far removed from the truth, because the objective, well, your goal is not to create a natural conversation. Your goal is to use elements of natural conversations to help people achieve their goals, and they are very different, right? So it's, we're only using these
In fact,
conversations because it's
let me ask you, forgive me for interrupting you. Let me ask you to repeat that because I think that's, if you remembered what you said, just please repeat that for our listeners because I think that's a
yeah.
huge takeaway.
So the goal is not to have a natural conversation. The goal is to use elements of natural conversations to make it easier for people to achieve their goals. And they're very completely different things. And once you start understanding the difference between the two, you have a whole different perspective on the design process. And that has to do with managing expectation. It has to do with framing. There people have the Paul Gricey, researcher who coined the cooperative principle, and it means that when people communicate, we want to be cooperative. There are four maxims. Yeah, we're truthful. What we say is relevant. We can infer meaning. We adjust our tone, all those sort of things. They come natural to people, and when people interact in conversation, they expect both parties to do that. But your conversational agent is not automatically going to do that. So you when the conversation kicks in, people get lost in it. It feels very natural, and then all of a sudden, that's an emotion that you need to manage on your user's perspective. Which, because you can never get to that level as an AI assistant. You can imitate it a little bit with GPT, but a few turns in, you already see
Yeah,
that it's
yeah,
just a trick,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So the only thing you can do is be fair and honest and help people achieve their goals, and also teach them how they can get the most value from this interface. And because people will start to speak differently to the AI assistant, right? The same way that people adjust their tone when they speak to children rather than speaking to an adult, right? So people will also learn how to get value from this system if we have a good approach to the design process, I would say.
Good approach to the design process, art and science. I mean, it's Kahneman, it's copywriting, it's a number of things brought together and all the references that you had there. Hans, tell us, just give us the overview of the types of courses that are offered now by CDI.
Yeah. So um, what we have, and that's launching very soon, so I'm just going to pretend it's already there. What we have in general is the CDI workflow that gives everyone kind of the introduction to what are the steps that I need to take to create good AI assistants. How do I design a conversation? And in general, to summarize that, it's mentalize the context of the conversation. So think about, what does this even mean for the person interacting with it? What's their state of mind? And then have the conversation. So actually have, if you want to design a conversation, don't just write, actually say it out loud. Uh, Validate that and make that inclusive through Wizard of Oz testing, and then optimize that for behavior. That's kind of like the core of the workflow. So that's your introductory course. Everybody can take that, from practitioners to executives. And then you kind of go into a design track or an AI training track, right? So it's, do you actually focus on the words coming out of the assistant, or do you focus on understanding what people say and training the AI models? Those are then kind of the two separate tracks. That's our core certification program, where you have different levels. And then we have a lot of cool other stuff with, like, voice flow courses. Qbox has a
Mm-hmm,
course.
mm-hmm,
There's a
mm-hmm,
course on
mm-hmm.
WhatsApp. And one that's coming soon. I'm very proud of that. It's with the Alan Turing Institute on ethics in conversational AI. So how do I make sure that I am inclusive, that I am taking the right steps, that I have people in the room that make sure that we're not ignoring part of our audience, etc.
Hans, let me ask. Let's go to the executives who come in, take courses. These are not individuals looking to become conversation designers. These are individuals, I'm assuming, who are, what is this conversational AI thing? What's this chatbot voice thing? What are some of the major questions that they bring to you, or the prejudices that they walk into the room with? What's the
Yeah,
mindset of the business crowd that comes into CDI courses?
Yeah, I mean, there's this. I think, and it's changing a little bit now, but there's been some disappointment in AI in general, right? People, sales teams would walk into the room and they say you plug it in and then it works, and that didn't turn out to be the case. So there's some reservations around it. And does this really work? And there's so many poor chatbots that they're a little bit skeptic, which makes sense. But the main question that people have is, what are the use cases? Of course, what's the ROI in these specific use cases? But more than anything, where does this sit in my organization? Who do I need? Who's going to be doing this? What's the skill set that they need for that? And we have a very simple framework for that, where we kind of look at mindset, skill set, culture, and system. So, what kind of individuals do you need, and how do they perceive the work? What's the skill set that they need? Your organization, what does it look like? What kind of strategy do you need? And then what kind of technical components do you need to execute on that? And you don't need everything on day one. I think that's the most important thing. When you're just starting out, you don't need the most advanced experience. You don't need the most advanced technology. You don't need the biggest budgets, but you kind of grow into that. And you need to be working on skill set, culture, and technology all at the same time. And I think where we've seen a lot of enterprises make the mistake of having, an MVP, trying that out, they see the value, and then they double down too quickly. So they'll hack something together. They see the light. They've defined their northern star, which is always the same. Lots of automated
Yeah,
journeys, great
yeah, yeah,
experience.
yeah,
Lots
yeah,
of
yeah.
scope, great experience. Um, so they've seen that North Star, they define it, then they start building everything for the end state. So they build way too much, but they don't invest in the individual skill sets that people need. They don't take time to really educate themselves. Also, from as an executive team, of how big does this team need to be? What kind of budget do I need? What kind of environment do I need for these people to excel at? Um, so because they go from MVP to the big technology stack, they kind of skip some of those steps and go off track and not get the value that they deserve.
They forget to walk, and then they start trying to sprint. Is that kind of what
I guess I guess
unfortunately
that's kind
happens?
of I guess that's kind of what, yeah.
Hans, we're going to
Well
wrap up
said,
here,
John.
but just
I'm
one,
gonna use that
but
one.
just
Yeah, I'll put it on a
but
t-shirt.
just one thing here as we wrap up, and that is, it's a pleasure, the Open Voice Network, with a formal partnership with the Conversation Design Institute. And Hans, we're just kind of a mini announcement. We're planning some executive education outreach. The Open
Yeah,
Voice Network is with the Conversation Design Institute, looking at scaling some of your work with great university partners. So I think everyone, hey, stand by. There's more to come from the Conversation
watch
Design
out.
Institute, and and Hans, let's have a few more of these conversations because there's so much more to explore and to share
Yeah,
here on the Future of Voice podcast. This is John Stine, the Open Voice Network, with Hans von Dam, CEO and founder of the Conversation Design Institute. Hans, thanks so much, and everyone have a
thank you so
great
much.
day. Thank you.
Thank you, John.